The next speech, presentation, paper on a political and psychological strategy to achieve a workable world is by Rabbi Michael Lerner. I was just going to sort of introduce him as the guy with the biggest smile I've ever seen. But he has a few other things in his bows to his arrow. He, besides being the editor of Tikkun, is that it? All right, Tikkun magazine. That's it. That's this. Aside from being editor of that and having won the Religious News Writers Award for the last 2 years, Rabbi Michael Lerner is chair of the nationwide ecumenical network of spiritual progressives. So I think what I'm going to do is invite him to come to Canada, because we're having an election up there, and boy, do we want to get in a progressive government. So what is really tickling about his background is he has a PhD in political philosophy and a second in clinical psychology. And it is in this fact that he's been the author of 11 books, including, I love this title, The Left Hand of God. I've heard of the right hand of God, but this is it. The Left Hand of God, Taking Back the Country from the Religious Right. Where are you, Max? All right. There we go.
Before I go up there, I'm going to pass around a few copies of Tikkun, since probably most of you haven't seen it, just so that you know what it is. Then I feel free to subscribe to it. So, oh, great, yeah, wonderful. Nice. Take a look at it. It's an interfaith and Jewish and interfaith and secular humanist welcoming. We need to have to over here. No, that's fine. I've seen it before. Thank you. Great. So, as I wrote in the bit that was in your packet, I think Joseph Schwartzberg's work is just brilliant. He said, well, I shouldn't say brilliant. It should say useful, effective, plausible, can happen now. But I also think it's brilliant. So I'm talking about, and I'm not going. I think I decided not to read what I wrote, and just talk a little bit about it. I want to talk about the psychological and spiritual preconditions for realizing that book's vision and more generally the vision of all of those who have talked here today and yesterday about the kind of international institutions that need to be created. So I'm not talking about what those should look like. I'm talking about what are the psychological and spiritual preconditions for that possibility. And in order to do that, I need an hour, but I've just got 20, however I have, so I'm going to do as far as I can. And it's like this. Let me start with this. To understand what's going on at the level of why it is that people are not embracing the vision of world federalists. For that matter, not embracing the vision of liberal and progressive forces in this country. Why is it that they're not embracing it? What is going on? When I got into that a little bit, I'll go into it in a second, that I was lucky enough to be the principal investigator of a National Institute for Mental Health study of the psychodynamics of American society, particularly focused on middle-income working people, and I'll get to that in a second. But before going there, I want to say a larger framework to understand American politics, and I believe politics in Western countries and perhaps in all countries. There is a struggle that's been going on for the past 10,000 years between two major visions of what it is to be a human being, and what the nature of life is about. And I call one the right hand of God and the other the left hand of God. So let's talk about the right hand of God for a second. The first vision says that we human beings are thrown into this world by ourselves. And as we come to consciousness, we get to see that everyone around us is looking out for themselves, maximizing their own advantage, and willing to manipulate, control, dominate you in order to get their own well-being served. And given that that's the nature of the world, to be a rational actor at this historical moment, or at any historical moment where this view appeals, is that you have to find the ways to develop the tools and mechanisms to dominate, control, and manipulate others. And if you don't, or to the extent that you do, you will be successful in this world. And to the extent that you don't, you will be unsuccessful in this world. It's okay. It is not only Donald Trump. Is that okay? So, halavai, I only wish that it was only Donald Trump. Okay, so, that in order to, and this worldview, this view says that to be a rational actor is to maximize your own advantage without regard to the consequences for others. And to care for, and this is a worldview that then translates into a politics. In order to achieve personal security, in order to achieve security and well-being for your family, for your community, for your country, you need to make sure that you have the power and that you have developed that sense, that ability to control and manipulate and dominate others, or else others will dominate and control you unless you can make an alliance with somebody more powerful than you who will, and you will be a lieutenant in their global army, whether that's an economic or social army, however that is defined. Now this worldview, I call it the worldview of fear. It's a worldview that leads people to believe that, well, as my teacher at the Jewish Theological Seminary, Abraham Joshua Heschel, used to say, the mantra for American society could be, suspect your neighbor as yourself. It's a worldview that it leads to fear, it leads to distrust, it leads to power over domination and control. And yet it has become the dominant worldview for a large number of people around the world and in the United States. Now, on the other hand, the alternative view, the other view, goes something like this. The left hand of God, let's say. Actually, no, most of us didn't come into the world all by ourselves. Most of us came into the world through a mother. And our mother, for the first few years of our life, gave us loving and caring energy enough to survive and thrive. Many psychological studies were done in the early part of the 20th century to show that if there wasn't a sufficient level of care and support in those first few years, babies would die from, they called it failure to thrive. Your mother gave you enough loving and caring to make it possible for you to survive. Now, some people at this point say to me, Rabbi Lerner, you don't know my mother. She's such a neurotic and whatever. So I want to say, I'll stipulate for anybody who needs to hear this, I'll stipulate that your mother was any way you saw her, but, you know, as neurotic as you say. But nevertheless, she gave you a core of loving and caring without a reasonable expectation of a good return on her investment of time and energy. Okay. Now, so the earliest experience we had on this view is a one of love and caring and nurturing. And from that flows a different worldview, a worldview that says that the way to survive in this world, the way to get safety and security in this world is through caring for others, is through generosity towards others, is through love. So this worldview was the foundation for most of the religious and spiritual traditions of the human race throughout most of its history. However, at some point, for reasons that I don't want to go into right now because of the timing, some of the religious leaders lost, and religious traditions lost faith in that. And so some of those religious leaders ended up de facto becoming more like the right hand of God version of the world and discrediting, in fact, the spiritual religious traditions that seem to be, in their practice, very far from the ideals of love, caring, and generosity that they were about. But these two worldviews, the worldview of fear and the worldview of, I'll call it, caring and generosity, these two worldviews have been heard and articulated by almost everyone on the planet. Almost everyone on the planet has heard both of these worldviews. And most people are on a continuum someplace between the worldview of fear and the worldview of love. Between someplace between and where you are actually depends in part on how much that love, how long that love continued as a child, what your encounters were in school and how much they may have undermined them, what were your adult life experiences in relationships, whether you met people who saw you as fundamentally deserving of love and caring and respect, or whether you met a lot of people who were using you, manipulating you, trying to get something from you, whether it was personal advancement, whether it was sex, whether it was money, whatever. But so where you are on the continuum at any given moment is partly a product of those factors, but also partly a product of where the social energy is moving. Because when the social energy moves towards fear, for example, after 9/11, then the voices in our heads that have told us that the world is a very scary place in which people are out to hurt us unless we get power over them first, those voices start to feel validated. Conversely, when after an Iraq war for several years produces more chaos and more destruction, and along comes Obama and talks about the possibility of hope, social energy starts to move more towards the left hand of God, towards the energy that makes it possible for us to believe in a possibility of a caring world. And sadly enough, when Obama doesn't follow through on that and actually acts in ways that seem antithetical to what he was saying when he was running, then cynicism sets in and and social energy moves more back towards fear again. So this is a constant process. And so what I want to say to you is, if you understand what I'm saying, both voices are in everyone. And depending on the variety of circumstances in our personal lives and in the social reality, which of those voices becomes dominant at any moment. And for many people, it's a live question at almost any moment. In a personal encounter, you meet somebody and you start being open to them, and then they say something and you get scared and sort of feel, wait, I don't want to get too close to this person and don't want to open up too much. So this is a constant dynamic that's happening inside people all the time in almost every situation. The alternation between the right hand of God and the left hand of God, between the worldview of fear and the worldview of love and caring. And so those voices are always there. And I suggest whenever you hear a speaker, whenever you watch a television show or read a novel or see a movie or hear a political leader or a religious leader or anyone speaking, always ask yourself, what's the likely impact of this talk? Is it likely to move the energy of those who hear it more towards fear or more towards love? More towards domination, more towards validating domination, control, power over, or more towards generosity and caring for others? And if you do, I think you'll get an important element of the psychodynamics that are going on around you. Having said that, then I discovered how this played out in American politics and American society when I led this NIMH study of psychodynamics of American society, focusing on stress at work and stress in family life. And in that study, which was based on an N of some 10,000, and you can read about it in several of my books. The Left Hand of God is one, but before that, Spirit Matters, and before that, The Politics of Meaning. What we heard was this. What we learned from middle-income working people, that every day in the world of work, Most people spend most of their waking hours between the ages of 20 and 65 in the world of work. And in the world of work, people are learning day in and day out that there's a bottom line there, that the bottom line is to maximize money and power for those on top, that they will be seen as valuable to the extent that they can contribute to that. In the nonprofit sector, it's a little bit more about the ego of the people on the top, but for most people are not in the nonprofit sector, and so for most working people, it's about the money and power of those who run the institutions. And you are seen and valued to the extent that you are seen as somebody who can contribute to maximizing that bottom line for them. And very few people are there in the workplace to help you. They're each there to maximize their own self-interest. And so people come away from that day in and day out. Maybe they start out with very open and hopeful views of the world, but 10 or 15 years into their experience in the work world, they're already deeply cynical about what the nature of human beings are. They come away saying, you know, this is a very selfishness and materialist-oriented world. And if I'm going to survive in this world, I have to learn the techniques and strategies of being this way and seeing people this way in order to protect myself and to protect my family. So this creates now, the interesting thing that we learned was that at the same time, while people will tell you that this is how it is, this is, quote, the real world, they are simultaneously saying to themselves, and I hate it. I wish it wasn't this way. I really don't like it. But I have no options. I have no choice. This is the real world. What, 5 minutes left? Wait, how long? I thought I had 25 minutes or 30 minutes to talk. I just started. What time? What? What time did you start from? This can't be right. Okay. No, what time did you start from? What time? When did you start measuring? Half an hour. You're telling me that I used 20 minutes so far? Okay. Well, if that seems very implausible to me. Does anybody have a watch that's... What? Something is wrong here. No, okay. Well, some people say yes, some people say no. Okay, I'm going to go on, but I've just started this, and I haven't been talking for more than 10 minutes. There's just no way I could. Okay, so what this leads to is a spiritual crisis in the society, a psycho-spiritual crisis, in which people learn to treat others as dangerous, learn to see other people in terms of how to manipulate and control them. And this creates a deep spiritual crisis because people feel increasingly alone in the society, not valued for who they are, but only for what they can deliver to other people. Increasingly, even loving relationships. More and more people enter marriages through a sense of, okay, I'm going to commit to you because you can satisfy more of my needs than anyone else, anyone else likely to fall for me in the short run. And that creates a tremendous crisis in family life because not just in the 50% of marriages that end in divorce, but in the other 50% that don't end, people are never sure that their partner won't find somebody else who at some future point might satisfy yet more of their needs. And this then, and so there's tremendous insecurity in this society. The right wing came along and said, there's a spiritual crisis here, a crisis in families, and they were right. And now what they did was they then turned it and blamed it on the demeaned others of our society. They turned it against the demeaned others and said, it's the fault of others. And they blamed, first whoever were the demeaned others, because this happens universally. But in our country, it was African Americans, it was Native Americans, it was homosexuals, then it became the feminist movement, then it became liberals, and it became government, government in particular, because many people, when they go into a government office, instead of feeling like they are being treated like with care and concern, they often feel in their experience in government, with government offices, that they are being treated as though they were somebody who didn't really deserve caring and respect. And that experience makes them feel very doubtful about the value of the New Deal and liberal legislation. Because the New Deal and liberal legislation provided objective caring in the form of money and benefits, but not subjective caring in the form of a government that showed that it really cared about and respected the people. So this has been the problem with the liberal agenda as a whole, that it hasn't taken into account the dynamic in the society that makes people feel that nobody really cares about them, that nobody really respects them. And the right wing was able to articulate that and move that into anger against government. So it's a very difficult thing to then try and say, oh, government, hey, it takes care of you. Let's have world government now. Okay, do you see what I'm saying? In other words, there is the very feelings that lead people into saying, let's defund government, are the same feelings that are that stand in the way of anybody taking, or at least a very large section of the population, taking the possibility of world government seriously. Because on the contrary, they're thinking more of that, which I already hate, which I want to pay less money for, and so forth. Okay. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay, so we have to address that, and the way to address that is to challenge the fundamental assumptions about the nature of the world. Because as I said, people yearn for a different kind of world. They yearn for a world of love, of caring, of kindness and generosity, only they don't believe it's possible. And they certainly have not heard from the liberal or progressive world any articulation of those values. They hear programs that are actually, because most liberals and progressives are involved in those programs precisely because they are caring human beings, precisely because they do want a world of love, caring, and kindness and generosity. But when you listen to them talking, they never talk about that. On the contrary, that sounds too soft for them, too feminine for them, too not strong and powerful to deal with the right. So they talk in terms of economic entitlements and political rights, but never about feelings, never about love and kindness and generosity, never about the ethical values that really are fundamental to a liberal agenda. And as a result, people don't hear that. That's why we created the Network of Spiritual Progressives. The Network of Spiritual Progressives is an organization, interfaith and also secular, humanist welcoming. It's not, in other words, you don't have to believe in God to be a spiritual progressive. What spiritual progressives are about, here's what it is to be a spiritual progressive. We want a new bottom line. And we want to articulate in the political arena a new bottom line. What is that new bottom line? That every institution in social practice, every government policy, every corporation has to be judged efficient, rational, and productive, not only to the extent that they maximize money and power, the old bottom line, but also to the extent that they maximize love and caring, kindness and generosity, environmental and ethical sensitivity, enhance our capacity to respond to other human beings as embodiments of the sacred, and enhance our capacity to respond to the universe with awe, wonder, and radical amazement, rather than simply to look at it and ask, I wonder if there's anything here I can turn into a commodity and sell. So how dare I come here to talk about this? Because I believe that this is the kind of discourse that could actually change the conditions of how liberal and progressive forces, including the forces that are seeking a more enhanced United Nations and a more enhanced world government of some form or other, to be heard. But to be heard requires to speak to and liberate that part of people's consciousness, that yearning that people have for a different kind of world that they very rarely hear articulated in the liberal and progressive discourse of this country, and they need to hear it. And they need to hear it from those of us who want to support the kind of vision that Schwartzberg and others have articulated here in the past in this conference. So how does that translate? What do you do? We're creating this network of spiritual progressives. Actually, we're trying to create a local chapter of it in Minneapolis. I'm speaking tomorrow at St. Joan of Arc Church, the Catholic church there, 9 and 11. But at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon at that church, I'm meeting with any of you who might be in Minneapolis who are interested in trying to ask, what could we do to make something like this happen here? But let me translate this into two specific programs that we've articulated, and I can afterwards give you some flyers about it and see if you might be interested in working wherever you are in the country. The first program is we're calling for a global Marshall Plan, a plan for the United States to take the leadership with other advanced industrial countries, to get those countries to all dedicate 1 to 2% of their gross domestic product each year for the next 20, to once and for all end, not ameliorate, but end global and domestic poverty, homelessness, hunger, inadequate education, inadequate health care. And that's all it would take. The Global Marshall Plan was introduced, by the way, this version of it, the version that we've developed, was introduced into Congress by Keith Ellison, the congressperson who represents this area, and wonderful guy, wonderful, and somebody who very much identifies with the spiritual progressive message. He's spoken at several of our conferences. He's into it. And that program you can read about on the web at tikkun.org tikkun is tikkun.org, tikkun.org/GMP for Global Marshall Plan. The second part of our specific program is the Environmental and Social Responsibility Amendment to the Federal Constitution. The ESRA says the following. Point number one, all state and national elections shall be publicly funded and no other money allowed. Not corporate and not also individual. Okay? In other words, unlike the move to amend people who are just focusing on corporations, the ESRA says all money, including the money of rich people, but the money of everybody. Nobody gets to donate to a candidate. Nobody gets to put money into politics. And hence, the politicians no longer have an incentive to spend disproportionate amount of their time and money finding out what the richer or the more affluent people have to say. Okay? That's number one. Number two, but will that bring democracy back? Is that sufficient? No. Why? Because corporations can move their assets or threaten to move their assets and bankrupt the society if we require too much in the way of environmental and social responsibility. And they have done so, and they've moved their assets or threatened to do so. Most recently, Boeing in Washington did this, and the state eventually capitulated to their demands. And so number two, the second part of the ESRA says that any corporation with incomes above $50 million a year, so this is not for your mom and pop corporations, this is for the big ones, that any corporation with incomes above $50 million a year must get a new corporate charter once every 5 years, and that corporate charter will only be given to those corporations that can prove a satisfactory history of environmental and social responsibility to a jury of ordinary citizens. Why ordinary citizens? Because we know that the regulatory bodies are filled up, not just by Republicans. Obama has done the same thing, filling up regulatory bodies with people who are from the very institutions or will get a job next year in those institutions that are supposedly being regulated. So ordinary citizens. And those ordinary citizens will be able to hear testimony from people all around the world who have been affected by the operations of that corporation, by what they sell, how they advertise, their hiring policies, etc. You can read this one at tikkun.org/ESRA. tikkun.org/ESRA. Now, these programs are not yet as visionary as a program for expanding the United Nations and creating a world government. They are intermediate steps. They are, and yet they are very far from what seems realistic. So, a central message that we have. Number one, we're putting those forward because in order to argue for those two programs, you have to confront the issue of, well, what counts as being rational and valuable in the society? And that's where the new bottom line comes in. To challenge the old bottom line, to say that the old bottom line is not the appropriate way to look at what counts as efficient or productive. To look, and so in arguing for the ESRA and the Global Marshall Plan, we use the new bottom line and the vision of the new bottom line because it's spreading that idea that's central. Now, okay, yeah, okay. He gave me a 5-minute sign now, and so I'll actually conclude in about 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, so nevertheless, when you hear what I've just talked, Global Marshall Plan and Environmental and Social Responsibility Amendment, it's reasonable to ask, is this guy crazy? I mean, does he really think it's possible? Is this possible? It seems so unrealistic, these plans. And here I just want to say that for those who are younger in the audience, you may not have lived through this, but for those of us who are older, many of us had the experience in the 1950s and 60s and 70s of hearing, first of all, when people said, we can overcome segregation in this society. Most people said it was very unrealistic. Second, when people came forward and said, we can help overturn apartheid in South Africa. Most people said very unrealistic. Third, when women came forward and said, we want to challenge patriarchy, most, not just men, but most women said to those early feminists of the second wave of feminism in the 1960s and 70s, said, hey, haven't you heard that patriarchy has been around for the last 10,000 years? There's no possible way that we're going to be able to make a significant dent on that. It's just part of reality. And yet, thank God those women were not realistic. And because they were not realistic, we've seen incredible transformation. I don't mean that patriarchy is gone. I do mean that the changes in the past 50 years have been unbelievable and fantastic. And similarly with gay marriage rights, the changes have been unbelievable and terrific. But 15 years ago, when that movement for marriage equality started, most supporters of those movements said, it can't happen. It's not going to happen. You're picking something that's too implausible. What do I learn from all this? The following. Don't spend your life being realistic. Okay? You never know what is possible in this world until you struggle and are willing to commit real time, your money if you have any, your life energies to what is desirable. Put your life behind the best vision of the world that you have for yourself. Go for your highest vision of the good. Don't spend whether it's the next 50 years of your life or the next 10 years of your life, however long you've got on this planet, don't spend it fighting for minuscule parts of the vision of what you actually want. Go for your biggest vision. I've articulated one such, to build a world with a bottom line of love and caring, kindness and generosity, ethical and environmental sensitivity, awe and wonder at the grandeur of the universe. But if that's not the one you want, go pick one that you do want and go for your highest vision of the good. Do not be realistic. Spend your life energies going for what is the most desirable vision of the good for yourself. And make that vision. Don't allow yourself to be defined by social movements that focus only on what's wrong. Okay, Martin Luther King did not become the icon of social change by giving a speech to hundreds of thousands of people saying, I have a complaint. No. Go for your largest dream. That's what I love about this group, why I'm so proud to be here and part of this today, because there's a dream there that I think is very, very valuable. Go for your highest vision. Don't be realistic. Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to have to cut your question and answer a little bit, but you
Okay.
got your message out.
I did.
That's the important thing.
Thank you. Yeah.
2 questions.
The impossible takes a little longer.
You know, actually, not necessarily. It turns out that, you see, this is the thing about what I started out with, why I gave that framework. Because does not appear, the media doesn't present this, the political leadership doesn't present this, but most people, including many people who are in the political right, want a world based on love, caring, kindness, and generosity. They've never heard that from an Obama. They've never heard that from most of the speakers. I've tried, you know, it's very rare that they hear that from our side of the political spectrum. People yearn for a different world, and they will respond and that's what we saw with the gay movement for marriage equality. When they stopped just focusing on we have a right, instead talked about in detail, hey, I want a loving relationship. You have a loving relationship. I want to be able to do the same kind of love. When they switch from economic entitlements and political rights to the heart, they cross the boundaries of left and right. Go for the heart. It may not take as long as you think when you go at the deepest level of people's yearning and speak about that. The second one.
I'm from a family of Tea Partiers, every single last one of them. And I read the Bible twice, and my brother's a minister and everything. And do you really understand them, Rabbi Lerner? Because how could they, you know, go through a religion and the Bible and the whole bit and come out on that side of the aisle voting for Trump like a lot of my relatives are going to? Do you really understand them? Why didn't they get it? Why was I wise enough to figure it out that it's about love and sharing?
I don't know the details of your family, but I know it. Okay.
Sit down for a couple
But I
hours.
do know a lot about people who have moved to the right, who were used. Now, and let me put it to you this way: there's 20% of the population. There's hardcore racist, sexist, homophobes, and they're not going to move. Okay. There's another 30% of the population that used to be voting for giving Democrats overwhelming majorities that have moved to the right. Why did that happen? And it's that group of people that I think we ought to focus on. And those people very often are people who could be moved in a different direction if we spoke to their heart. Now, why have they moved to that way? Well, partly they've been hurt. They've been disappointed. They've been frustrated in their lives. They've suffered. They're in pain. And I think a starting point to understand people who are disagree with you is to ask, where is their pain? And how can I empathically speak to the pain in their lives to liberate them to once again feel hopeful and feel that they could go with the possibility of a world of love? Okay.